What's going on, everyone? So it's going to be a bit of a rant, a little bit of a kind of wing it style video. So what I'm going to do is, instead of you just watching talking head stuff, I'm going to put some B-roll of the PC I actually just built right behind me over the video. And if you guys like that, just let me know. So yeah, let's start off with the 50 series, the major topic here. So like I mentioned in the last video, I was not actually planning on buying a 5090. I was actually looking for a 5080. I walked into a local micro center when I was picking up a different parts deal, which I'll throw up on the screen. It was this system technically behind me that I'm building at this time. I had just moved over some of the parts. But long story short, there was a Zotac there, and Zotac has been one of the companies really pushing out cards in the United States quite a bit. Whenever I go into Micro Center, the staff always compliments the fact that Zotac cards are always there. And not to mention, the Zotac Solid that I picked up was a really, pun intended, solidly built card. I had the previous gen Zotac 4080 for a little while, and I really didn't like the design. The fans were noisy, and I did test this one before selling it, and I did let it go at a very close to MSRP, by the way. Yeah, and the card was much better than they used to be. But what ended up happening was my first experience posting or putting the Zotac 5090 into the machine was pretty bad. And I want to get into that because I feel like this is not normal for NVIDIA or NVIDIA launches in general. And this is not going to be a video of me just bashing NVIDIA the entire time. I'm not here to just be like, I hate NVIDIA. No, this is a video complaining about how they launched this card and how poorly the optimization was right out of the gate, which is something that you don't normally see coming from the green team. So right out of the gate, of course, I did DDU and I wiped all of the drivers on the computer. Pretty much I'm on a semi-fresh install of Windows, and it's been functioning very, very well. I have a lot of apps and stuff like that, but mostly everything is just tied to the NVIDIA driver if you're going to install a card. So if you wipe the driver, you should be able to just put another card in. That's pretty much how simple it is if you're unaware. So I wiped the drivers and I installed the new 5090. And this is the Zotac 5090. Keep in mind, I'm on the Founders Edition now. Please note that the Zotac and the Founders Edition model both had the exact same issues across two different computers separately. So it's not a card model thing, it's just a driver thing from NVIDIA. So to go over basically the initial experience, booting up the PC for the first time felt a lot slower than usual. Actually, I believe it crashed into the BIOS. There was some kind of a memory issue, which may have actually been my fault as well, because I was jumping between different memory profiles and different sticks at the time. So I went in, corrected that, and then once I got to the login screen, another issue happened. Basically, Windows at this time had already auto-loaded a driver because Windows was taking so long to boot up. It was actually not fully, it was fully booted, but it didn't appear to be because it was actually black screens everywhere. I have a triple monitor setup. Now, I should have just plugged in one monitor to do the drivers, but sometimes I get a little ahead of myself. I plugged in all three, and for a good solid, I would say 2.5 to 3 minutes, which is quite a long time in PC time, the screens were black, and I was like, what's going on? I didn't want to restart it just in case it was an update or something in the middle going on in the background, so I left it, and finally the screens came up. During this time, I went to hit enter or spacebar, or I don't know what I did, double click, whatever it is to get into your Microsoft and log into your Windows account. I went in to do that, and it froze, and it stayed frozen probably for another 10 to 15 seconds, and then it allowed me to start typing my password. But once I was on the second digit of the password, or the PIN that I use, it didn't allow me to go further, and it froze again, and I was like, what the heck? And then all of a sudden, it just went into Windows. But everything was extremely stuttery and took a while to catch up. I almost felt like I was on a hard drive from years ago, running a hard drive on a spinning disk. If you don't remember those days, if you were trying to log into a computer, you actually had to wait a while once it hit the desktop for everything to settle down. And this still kind of can happen with cores, and like when you start up, you have a lot of startup apps and things that pop up, but this was like really, really too long for a 14900K and a RTX 5090. Like, come on, what's going on here? So I did a bunch of testing on the Zotac card, and the Zotac card was very quiet. Performance was good. I jumped into a bunch of games. I got higher performance than I'm used to. I actually figured out shortly after that overclocking the memory on these video cards is really, really beneficial in some games, especially a game like Call of Duty Black Ops 6. I was getting anywhere from 10 to 15, sometimes even 20 more frames per second, depending on the map and all that kind of stuff. But during this time, I was also undervolting the newer 14900K that I had just put in my machine. I was using a 13700K for a while, jumped over to the 14900K, definitely need to undervolt that chip, so I started doing that. And during this process, I realized when I would go into play Black Ops, I was using Black Ops as a test bench, basically, or tester, and I would go in to test the benchmark, and I noticed every time I would restart the computer, I would go in and the game would perform at like a third of what it should. In other words, if I'm supposed to be at 150 FPS, all of a sudden I'm at 50 FPS. Now, I'm pretty confused because I'm like, man, maybe I'm screwing up this undervolt majorly, but you can't really screw up an undervolt that bad. Like, it can be unstable, it'll crash BSOD, any of that kind of stuff, but it's not going to be to the point where like your FPS gets cut in half unless you're turning the core speed down or like turning off all your cores or something. You're going to get a pretty consistent experience. Even if you drop that speed, it's not going to be that much slower. It'll, you know, shave off a few FPS here and there. So now I'm in this kind of weird mode where I'm like, what the heck is happening? Why is it that every time I reboot the computer, one time it runs fine, I'm getting like 145 FPS in Call of Duty at 4K maxed out, and then I'll reboot it and I'm getting 45 FPS. Like, what the heck? Finally, after looking around, I wasn't paying attention on the Afterburner, the Reaver Tuner overlay. I noticed that the GPU was only running at 630 megahertz. That's quite a difference when you see 2.7-ish gigahertz usually running the game all the way down to 630. And if you're just looking at it quickly, like a quick glance, you'll see that the card is running at 99% usage. So you're like, what the heck, what's going on? The card's running at 99%. It wasn't until I looked a little bit further over on the Reaver Tuner thing and noticed that the frequency was off. So come to find out, they fixed this issue in a driver, but it was a hotfix driver, and not everyone had it. And I was actually talking to one of my friends, E-Rock, and he's like, why doesn't more people know about this? And you know, he's right. Like, what the heck? Why is it that a hotfix driver like this is just coming out just for a small portion of people? Danny Z also was having issues with his 5070 Ti MSI, with other problems, and I'll link one of his videos down below as well. But yeah, there was a lot of like weird things happening that doesn't normally happen on NVIDIA products. Like, this is how this launch is going. This is a very, very, like, almost the most unstable version of an NVIDIA launch I've ever seen. So then comes March 18th, and they actually released an official driver that fixed all of these issues. And I'm going to say this, my computer's running very well now. Everything is good, login, no problem. There's no stutters anymore. There's no like weird issues, but I've only had my card a couple of weeks. There have been people who have had 50 series cards since the very beginning that have been going through these problems. Actually, if you start looking around on the NVIDIA forums, like Reddit, all those places, you'll start to see that like this launch has been kind of a nightmare for the ones who couldn't get it, but even more of a nightmare for the ones who did get it. Now, of course, people are going to say things like, oh, that's why you don't go out and buy a new product. I'm testing it for the channel. I'm buying this stuff to sell to customers and other people. So it's like, I'm doing this anyways. This is going to happen for me, regardless of like what people's opinions are, because that's what I do on the side. If I'm not doing YouTube, I'm still selling PCs. I've done it for a long time. But everyone else who's experiencing this, someone who runs out and gets like a 5080 or 5070 Ti, they might be like running into all these weird problems. I remember Tech Yes City Brian had issues with risers, which I actually got my card running just fine on a riser, but he was saying that he was having issues with a riser and a 9800X3D and an SFF system. So there's another issue. Why is that a problem? I think it's probably because NVIDIA is daisy chaining multiple different connections together, and that's something that they've never done previously.
So there is issues right now. If you've got a Ryzen PC and you want to go mini ITX with a riser cable, you may come into some problems, as opposed to the RTX 4090, where I actually didn't have that problem.
Wrapping back around, I guess what I'm trying to say here is don't feel the FOMO if you weren't able to get one of these 50 series cards, because literally they need time to cook. There's something wrong with like something about this generation. I don't know if it's like because we're on the same node and they were trying to heavily modify that 4nm node. It's actually a 5nm technically, but NVIDIA calls it the 4nm node. And all the different little changes that were done on it to get it to be better, like with the AI and all that stuff, that's all good, but it feels super not ironed out. It just feels like a very, very sloppy release. I've never seen this. I've been doing this since 2012. I've been building computers since like 08, 07, and I have never seen a launch like this. This is like NVIDIA's probably worst launch that they've done. And that's without even going into the melting connector issues, which have been plaguing the 40 series and now the 50 series pretty much forever. From the very start, 4090s have never stopped melting. If you go and watch Northridge Repair or Northwest Repair, or any of those guys, you're going to see that they're still replacing those connectors all the time. Percentage of it being a user error, there's definitely user error there, but there's also DeBauer, who did definitely not have a user error. He was showing proof that there's an issue, specifically on the Founders Edition, but come to find out, according to BuildZoid, a lot of the other brands use a very similar design connector where basically the power ends up meeting at the same point. The only one that doesn't, apparently, is the Astral Asus, which is a huge benefit. If you're going to blow tons of money on a 5090 for yourself, it's going to be in your gaming rig, maybe get the Astral if you can find it below that $3,000 MSRP. I got one last negative thing to mention about the 50 series stuff, and it's got to be the PhysX thing. The PhysX thing it bothers me. I didn't even think about booting up Mirror's Edge until I heard that I couldn't. The second I heard that I couldn't, and don't get me wrong, you can turn off PhysX and it will run. But the second I heard that if you turn it off, it is a game changer, technically, because you're changing the physics of the game. Once you turn it off, it's not really the same experience, and it just bothered me. And so that's something that, you know, if you buy one of these cards, you're gonna have to live with that. Like some of those older games that run really well on like a 980 Ti are not gonna run that well on the 5080, the 5070, the 5090, right? I used to make a lot of these videos back in the day. This is kind of how I started my channel. Early 40 series, I was always hopping on new releases and stuff like that, but I slightly shifted into more like PC builds and like hardware flips and just more what I think is interesting and things that I'm actually doing all the time. This kind of like constant release videos that are posted all the time, it's just not something I've been doing on my channel as much anymore. But I can do this occasionally if you guys like hearing it from my perspective. I do want to know your perspective. Are you going to run out and buy an RTX 5080? Are you going to go for an AMD 9070, 9070 XT, which the 9070 XT is looking pretty badass. I'm not going to lie. Like the numbers of those undervolted cards in comparison to the 5080, we're talking like they're getting close. AMD is actually making some good moves here in this industry right now. So just hopefully they can keep up the stock, because that's where the whole entire thing will change for them. If they can keep a stock flow, you know, if they're over there like scratching TSMC's back and getting some more GPUs, maybe they can take over a good portion of the market during this generation. Not saying it's going to be huge, but yeah. So what are you guys' thoughts? Leave a comment down below. If you like the video, drop a like, and I'll see you guys in another one.